It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon at charity brunch at the local country club, filled with small talk, soft music, and clinking glasses. But when Sarah walked through those polished wooden doors in a plain dress and modest heels, the room, shifted eyes glanced her way, then turned to each other with smirks. She didn't belong, they whispered. Not here, not with them. The other women wore designer labels and diamond necklaces. Their laughter was sharp, their judgment sharper. To them, Sarah was just a simple woman, ordinary, maybe even invisible. Oh, but they didn't know the full story as she tried to enjoy the event. Sarah kept her head high, even when the snide remarks floated past her like perfume. Maybe she took a wrong turn. Whose guest is she? It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. She could feel the sting behind every word, every sideways glance. Alone at her table, sipping lukewarm tea, she reminded herself that she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to support a cause. And that was enough, or at least it should have been. Then came the moment no one expected. A deep, low hum echoed from outside. Glasses rattled slightly. Conversations paused. People rushed to the windows. A helicopter was circling above the club, slowly descending onto the nearby lawn. The guests were stunned. Was it a celebrity? A politician? Everyone wanted to know who it was. And then, in front of that same crowd that had mocked her just moments ago, Sarah stood up gracefully, without a word, walked toward the patio. The murmurs grew louder as she stepped outside, the wind from the rotor lifting her hair, her dress flaring gently. The helicopter touched down with military precision, and the door opened. What happened next left the entire country club frozen in disbelief. Because the man who stepped out wasn't just anyone. He was her husband, and he had a message to deliver in the most unforgettable way possible. But before we reveal what he said and why this moment shook the entire room, let's rewind a bit. Who was Sarah, really? And why did her husband go to such lengths to make a statement that no one there would ever forget? Sarah wasn't born into luxury. She didn't come from wealth, and she never cared about showing off. She grew up in a small town, raised by hardworking parents who taught her to value kindness over status and humility over pride. She met her husband, James, when they were both fresh out of college, two people with big dreams and very little money. He was quiet, driven, always thinking ahead. She was the calm to his storm, the heart to his hustle. They built everything together, side by side. No shortcuts, no handouts. Just years of effort, sacrifices, and long nights. James went on to build a successful company, one that grew faster than anyone expected. But even as the wealth came in, Sarah never changed. She still wore simple clothes, still preferred home-cooked meals to five-star restaurants, and still smiled at strangers, even when they didn't smile back. She didn't care about keeping up appearances. But now, standing among people who judged her for not fitting their mold, Sarah realized just how quickly people could forget what really matters. The country club crowd didn't know any of this. They only saw the surface, a woman without a designer bag who didn't know their names or their favorite labels. To them, she was forgettable, easy to overlook. They had no idea who James was or that he rarely made public appearances. He preferred to stay behind the scenes, letting others take the spotlight. But today was different. Today, he'd shone. Up in a way no one could ignore. Inside, people were whispering now, trying to piece together who she was, why a helicopter had landed just for her, and what this all meant. But the biggest question of all was still hanging in the air. Why did her husband come like that? What message was he sending? And why today, of all days? Sarah's feet crunched softly on the stone path as she walked toward the helicopter. Every eye at the country club locked on her. Some stood frozen in place, clutching their drinks. Others leaned in to whisper behind hands, still trying to figure out what was going on. A few looked nervous, as if they suddenly realized their earlier comments might have been overheard or were about to backfire. But Sarah didn't look back. Her face was calm, her pace steady. To those watching, it might have looked like a dramatic scene from a movie. But for Sarah, it was something much more personal. That morning, she hadn't planned to attend the event at all. She'd hesitated, even told James she might skip it. "They don't really want me there," she'd said with a shrug. But James had encouraged her. "Be yourself. That's more than enough," he told her, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. He never made her feel less than, not once. But deep down, she knew today would test her. James wasn't the flashy type. In fact, he avoided public scenes. But he always noticed. And today, when Sarah had texted him just 3 words, "You were right," he knew exactly what they meant. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. In his world, actions spoke louder than words. So when that helicopter landed and its doors opened, it wasn't just about making an entrance. It was a statement. One that said, "You don't get to decide her worth." Inside the club, the silence grew heavier. People who had barely looked at Sarah an hour ago were now hanging on to her every step. But they still didn't know what was coming next or who James really was, and Sarah. She was just getting started. As Sarah neared the helicopter, the rush of wind tangled her hair and tugged at her dress, but she didn't flinch. A few people had stepped outside now, curiosity overpowering their pride. Among them was Amanda Carlton, the event's host, a woman known for her high society connections and for never missing a chance to remind people of them. Amanda had been the first to offer Sarah a tight, polite smile when she arrived, followed quickly by a backhanded compliment about her refreshingly modest outfit. Now, Amanda stood at the patio rail, trying to keep her cool as her well-practiced charm started to crack. The other women, so perfectly polished in their expensive heels and high-end designer dresses, were suddenly unsure of what to say. Few of them had laughed earlier when Sarah asked for directions to the restrooms, assuming she was part of the waitstaff. Now, they watched in stunned silence as the man stepping out of the helicopter walked straight toward her. He wasn't just any man. He was James Weston, CEO of Weston Technologies, investor in 3 major Fortune 500 companies. And, up until now, someone they had only read about in business magazines. But Sarah and James didn't care about headlines. What mattered to them were the small things: trust, loyalty, respect. The kind of values that didn't come with a price tag. Inside the club, a different conversation was happening. The board members, who had barely acknowledged Sarah earlier, were now whispering about missed opportunities. Had they overlooked someone important? One man quietly pulled out his phone, trying to confirm James's identity. A young intern at the event recognized him instantly and whispered, "That's her husband. That's James Weston." Meanwhile, Sarah paused just a few steps from him. She hadn't expected this, not like this. And now that everyone was watching, she felt the weight of every cruel laugh and careless word. But what James did next would take the conflict to another level. No one at the country club was ready for it. James reached out his hand, and without a word, Sarah placed hers in his. The rotors behind them slowed, but the tension in the air only grew heavier. He helped her up onto the platform beside the helicopter, then turned to face the growing crowd gathering just beyond the patio. Everyone was watching, every club member, every volunteer, every woman who had mocked Sarah earlier, and still, he hadn't said a single word. Whispers turned into anxious murmurs. A few guests tried to play it cool, laughing lightly as if they were in on some big inside joke. But deep down, no one was laughing anymore. Some were clearly nervous, worried they'd said something that would come back to haunt them. Others were now regretting every look, every snide comment they made in passing. One of the board members, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch, stepped forward and cleared his throat, ready to offer some clumsy greeting, but James didn't even glance his way. Instead, he pulled something from the inside pocket of his jacket, a folded envelope. It looked simple, almost too ordinary given the scene. But when he handed it to Sarah and whispered something in her ear, her eyes widened. She didn't speak. She just stared at the envelope for a long moment. Her fingers tightened around it. The crowd grew restless. Phones were out now. Some were trying to record, others pretending they weren't. Amanda stood a few steps behind, her smile frozen in place, but her eyes shifting. She knew something was coming, a key, and she didn't like surprises, especially ones that didn't include her. Then James stepped down, motioning for Sarah to speak. But she hesitated. For the first time, everyone there wanted to hear what she had to say. The woman they had mocked, dismissed, underestimated, now she held their full attention. But Sarah remained quiet, and just before she opened her mouth to speak, the wind picked up again, tossing the hem of her dress and the edge of that mysterious envelope. Whatever was inside could change everything, and still no one had any idea what was about to be revealed. Sarah stood with the envelope in her hand, its corner fluttering in the breeze. Everyone leaned in, watching her every move, expecting a speech, a declaration, something. But just as she took a breath to speak, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Wait." Amanda Carlton stepped forward.